right, good morning. Happy Thursday to everybody. Welcome to today's ATAP webinar. Let's go ahead and get things started. My name is William Uranga. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition at Spokeo, a member of ATAP's Program Council, and your host for today's webinar. For those of you who are new to ATAP or attending your first webinar with ATAP, a couple of things you should know about us. One is we got started in 2016 as the Association of Talent Acquisition Professionals. We represent interests of talent acquisition, recruiting, and staffing professionals at every level. And our mission is to cultivate a community that sparks innovation, engagement, and knowledge sharing for talent acquisition. We have a great membership group, including corporate members, as you can see here, as well as 750 individual members and growing. They get involved in events here at ATAP, as well as other program council efforts we have that we'll talk about in a minute. And of course, we could not do this also with our sponsors helping us carry some of the interesting work forward that we're doing. So I'd like to give a nice shout out to Greenhouse, Saba, Scout, Cornerstone, Eightfold AI, People Results, Recruitix, and Smart Recruiters. If you know folks in talent acquisition profession, please invite them to consider joining us here at ATAP. You can certainly go to the website at atapglobal.org. It is a great way both to network with other talent acquisition professionals by volunteering the events and also through our Facebook community. We also increase talent acquisition knowledge through the development of white papers and webinars such as this one. And we also advocate and build out standards and advocating for TA related issues. A couple programming notes before we get into today's content. Today is Thursday, November 29th already. We are just kind of flying through 2020 as it is. We've got a great topic for today. Please note that we will be in our recording today's webinar. So if you have registered for today, you will get an email from us that will include both a link to the video of today's webinar, as well as a PDF version of the slides. And today I'll note there's quite a bit of reference material or content. So please feel free to go easy on your handwriting of notes and keeping up stuff referred, because we do have those captured in a compendium at the end of today's slide deck. If you haven't noticed already, we do have a Q&A section here on Zoom. So if you do have questions, and I bet a few of you already have some lined up, we will be taking those towards the end of the presentation today. So please get those over in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure that we have those lined up and answered by our guests today. All right. So for today, we are covering information with regards to veterans. And the question is, how veteran ready is your organization? I'm really super fortunate here to have Emily Garrity and Riley Wilkins with us today. Emily heads up a not-for-profit organization that she leads, and she'll get to talk a little bit more about that. Riley Wilkins also has a couple organizations he's involved with that is around sales optimization, and is also a U.S. Marine himself. So he'll be bringing his personal experiences and sharing that with you. So Emily, Riley, welcome, and Semper Fi, Garrity.
Thank you. Thank you. So again, my name is Emily Garrity. The organization is connectvets.org. We actually educate transitioning service members and veterans on what is the HR process, because obviously it's very different from the military. And I'm really happy to have known and worked with Raleigh for, in essence, almost the last year. And you know, and he brings that perspective of that transition. What is that transition story, et cetera. And we thought for the purpose of this topic that it would be helpful for you to, learn and us to share what it is from both perspectives. So with that, we're going to kick off with the first poll. So Raleigh, if you want to take over and share your screen.
Sure. Let's go ahead and get started here. All right, and let me know when you can see that screen. Are you good?
We're good. So go to there we go. So our first question is, what percentage of the U.S. population do you believe qualify for the military service today? And we'll just give you a few minutes to guess your answers.
All right, interactive poll here, so feel free to select if you're watching in. Have you got any responses coming back yet, William?
We do. Let me go ahead and share that with you.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, if you said less than 30%, and I'll let you go, Raleigh, to the next slide, you would be right. So yes, only 25 to 29% of the U.S. population will even qualify for military service today. And you can see from this slide that a lot is due to health conditions. 1/4 is unfit physically, and 25% do not meet basic education requirements. Many of you may not know that a GED is not considered a basic education requirement. You actually have to have a high school diploma to actually enter military service at this point in time. And then, of course, criminal backgrounds, etc. So you go to the next. We can. And then our next poll, it's a quick poll, is why do you think organizations hire or struggle to hire and retain veterans? So in your personal opinion, where are you struggling? And this is a multiple choice. William, do we have answers?
Still have some folks getting, it looks like we're done. Here we go.
Okay. Lack of understanding regarding the military resume and a challenge. Very interesting. Very interesting. And yes, we hear this a lot. And we'll get into, hopefully, a lot of what we're presenting today will help you with all of these. And next slide. So Raleigh?
Sure, yeah. Well, Emily, thanks for the introduction. And can you guys hear me okay? Quick thumbs up from the other presenters. Good to go? All right, great. We teach a lot of stuff through virtual instructor led, so it's always good to get engagement. Yeah, so we figured we'd frame this profile and the training up today. Thanks for joining. This is going to become the high word count part of the presentation. So as a former U.S. Marine and also a salesman, I'll try to keep the word count low and we'll spend some time together. But the goals of the session, the way our military learns, they learn in something called TLO, ELO methodology, meaning they learn terminal learning objectives and enabled learning objectives. And so the terminal learning objective style that they learn is knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So by the end of today's program, you'll be able to understand why our U.S. military is a high potential source of recruits for yourself, understand some of the competencies of our U.S. military that you may not have been aware of. You're going to understand more about key terms and understanding the impact of hiring. So that DD 214, if you're not familiar with that form, Emily's going to touch on that. It's essentially the record of service. It's a resume for military. We're going to teach you how to look at that and how to, very briefly, how to overview it and things to look for so you can find non-traditional talent. And then again, we're also going to talk about some of the different military bridge programs. I know we have some people on the phone today who are experts in this field as well, but there are a number of programs that are available to you to hire directly from the military. So then what are you going to do with this information? The idea is to give you a competitive advantage over your competition in this war for talent. You know, we're always looking for, and as a hiring manager, I spent 20 years in private practice working at companies from startups through NASDAQ. in roles from account executive to senior VP of sales. And I know that it was always challenging trying to find the right talent. Getting resumes for a role wasn't hard. I get 3 to 350 resumes every time I put a job out. But how do I find those non-traditional resumes and those non-traditional candidates who might actually be the best fit? So we're going to introduce you. Emily later on is going to talk about 10 best practices for hiring veterans and how to integrate that in your strategy. And then you're going to be able to execute and not only attract and retain or attract and train, but retain. Because retaining our U.S. military after you hire them is a challenge that many veteran employers have found. And so we're going to touch on why that is and some of the reasons that you may struggle as well in your organization. And leaving today, you should be able to effectively execute on your military hiring strategy. Emily, anything you would add to that?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. So this is going into my area of experience, which is our U.S. military and the transitioning military. So we're going to start with some facts and figures about our military, just to give you a sense of this talent pool that you may not have thought about. So there's roughly 1.3 to 1.4 million active duty military right now. Of that, a quarter of that, roughly 20%, transitions every single year. So there are 14 million veterans in our population. Of those, about 9 million are workforce aged. And so when we think about an opportunity and we think about an entire country full of people that we may not have thought to tap into, this can be a really interesting one to tap into. But there's some challenges of that. So we're going to dig deeper in this 280,000 graduating military members per year. And I use that term graduating because my submission is that a 4-year enlistment is equal and equivalent to the 4-year liberal arts degree that we're trying to look for inside our organizations. Because although 93% don't have a 4-year college degree, they do have extensive training and things that you may not think of as being military training. You have administration schools, you have IT schools. There's things that even in their job that don't look like they relate that could be a really good source of talent for you. But the challenge is that when they leave active duty, only 25% of the jobs in the military have a direct civilian counterpart correlation. That doesn't mean that they can't succeed. When I was a sales leader, I always looked to our military talent because of the strengths that we're going to explore in the slides that are coming up. But there is no sales MOS in the military because we don't sell anything in the military. We spend money, we don't make it. And so the idea was how to create that bridge. Of those that we hire, the other challenge and some of the unbiased or some of the bias that we have against hiring military is that the turnover that occurs from that first hire out of the military. And so we're going to talk about why that is. But greater than 80% exit their first role within 2 years. So how do we make sure that we retain that military talent that we bring on? And then finally, those military veterans that are in the population, when they go out, they tend to have 3 to 5 jobs in their first 3 years, not because they don't have the right skill set, but the transition bridge wasn't there. And in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a tremendous push to create those bridges. And we're going to introduce you to those today. So this is an actual email that I got. It's been redacted to take the person's identity out, but this is what faces our U.S. military. And this is where my heart gets really committed to this. And I hope yours does too, listening to this. I'll give you a chance to read through this, but essentially this is a Navy corpsman, which means it's a Navy medical personnel who was in combat medic position, green side, worked for the Marines or worked with the Marines and spent 8 years on active duty. He's got 2 kids and he's got a wife that got into UW-Madison Law School, but he can't afford to come off active duty because the only jobs that civilian employers are willing to give this person is $10 to $12 an hour menial labor jobs. And he can't afford to go back to school with 2 young children. So our military recognizes that there's a challenge. And because of that, they created programs like SkillBridge, Hiring Our Heroes. There's a number of different organizations that work to help transition and prepare them. But this is what they're facing when they come out. And so we say, thank you for your service. Let's see what we can do to do more than just thank you for your service and actually create a job or an opportunity. And our military is 100% committed to this as well. This is former Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Neller. And these are statements from his last address. And he said that we do 3 things in the military. And he's talking about Marines, but I mean, this is a military inclusive. We make military members, we win battles, and we return better citizens to our nation. That's our mission. And so we're going to explore, how do we do that? What is that? So let's think about our US military, and let's think about our own experience, my experience. I did my best to think all branches, from the Air Force to the Marine Corps to the Navy to the new Space Force to the Air Force, and all the different branches. What do we have in common? Three things. And these are things that should be at the top of the list for any recruiters looking to bring in talent. Number one, we all went to boot camp. Number two, we all wore uniform. And number three, we're all subject to something called the UCMJ. So boot camp was a transformative experience where we learned over 8, 12, 14 weeks how to apply program information into an executable strategy. We learned how to work on teams. We learned how to put our needs below the needs of the team and the mission. We learned how to work organizationally. We learned discipline, determination, resiliency, leadership, loyalty, all the things that we want out of our employees. We learned, but we learned it with a significant emotional event, because if we failed in our roles, people died. So when we think about what Susie Sorority and Frankie Fraternity are learning in their 4-year degree, they're learning, how do they work on teams? How do they process information? How do they work inside organizations? How do they process large amounts of disparate information and put it together in a compelling plan? I'd submit that's exactly what we teach our US military across those 4 years, but we embed it there. They learn to wear a uniform. They learn how to work inside organizations. And the UCMJ, really quickly, it's a set of laws that sits on top of the US Constitution that's just like being a US citizen, except for our US military voluntarily give away half their freedom and all their rights. So they can't go where they want, do what they want, say what they want, be what they want, and they are held to a different standard. But because of that, they come and have been reinforced in a way that they have that loyalty and integrity that we wish we had in all of our employees. The reason I bring that up, and I harp on the slide before we get into this, is that when our military comes off active duty, they don't have the vernacular that a 4-year degree is going to show you when they populate and they come through your resume system. So you're going to interview them, and they're going to struggle to translate their military experience, because that boot camp, all of a sudden, they take that mission orientation extremely seriously. So everything that they've done is mission, then team, then self, which we like the selflessness, but they struggle in interviews articulating what it is that they did, even when they were the ones that won. I've met with Silver Star winners, Purple Heart winners, and everything they talk about is team. So how do I start to, as a person that's interviewing, bring those pieces out? How do I start to do, and essentially the role that one of our military members said, he feels like he's navigating the streets of Paris with a map of Chicago, and that we have to create that bridge. And so our TAP officers do a good job, SkillBridge does a good job. It's something to be aware of as we go through it. So what are some of these qualities? Why hire our veterans? Some of these things are, you look at these and you go, of course, that makes sense. But think about it when as it applies to a position in your organization. Leadership skills. We're going to go into what the average military veteran has done by the time they're 24 years old. So that when you get somebody that's 24 years old apply to your organization, you might think, okay, they've got a year or two of experience. Our military veterans have 6+ years of experience in teamwork. They have character, the discipline, the adaptability. But people hire our veterans because of the ability to impact their business. And so as we look at this, and we think about what the average veteran has accomplished by the time they're 19 years old, they've taken a distilled liberal arts education and gone through a boot camp. But beyond boot camp, we go to an A school, which is where we learn a specific trade. And it is an intensive process. It is a transformational process where you imbibed on a very specific set of tools that you can utilize. They've completed advanced training. They've usually lived on their own. And if you think about the average age that people leave home now, I think it's somewhere around 30 years old. By age 19, they've already been deployed across the world. They've had hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment, and they've been in an extremely high stress, high demand, no excuses environment. Then we think about what they've done by the time they're 24 and they're presenting themselves to you. They've usually been promoted multiple times. They've sometimes been in charge of millions of dollars worth of equipment. They've had to take these type of environments that you and I maybe would take for granted as being safe environments to be able to go into and to be able to operate under high pressure situations. And then they've seen and they've been a part of teams where there's two things in the military we don't think about if you're a civilian. One is you can't choose the team that you inherit. So by the time I've been in 2 years, I have a team that I'm responsible for getting a job done, but I don't get to choose my people and I can't fire them. The other thing they can't do is they can't quit. So you got to learn to work inside organizations in really difficult environments sometimes. And so there's no just going across the street because I want to take the job or I don't like the job's been assigned to me. I have to learn a way to do it. And so when you think about these transferable military skills, this essentially has qualified our U.S. military to at least have a seat at the table to do the interview. And when you're looking at hiring and you're looking at bringing us on board, you have to look beyond and say, some of the misconceptions around, and Emily and I will get a little deeper in this later, but some of the crazy interview questions I would get that are completely inappropriate and yet seem like just a throwaway comment, So what's war like? Or, where were you deployed? Or how much do you make? Or are you disabled? Things that we would know as HR professionals we shouldn't do. And yet somehow, because we're military, we get asked these questions. But these are some of the transferable military skills that should jump out at you that, gosh, I wish my average employee had this. And they do, and they've proven it. So even just taking the slide and turning these into questions as you get military candidates to present, these can be really useful as you start to think about how do you start to imbibe and bring into these military talent into your organization. And so there's a slide that I created, and I did this, and I know it's a bit of an eye chart, but as you look at this slide, the goal here is to show you on the left-hand side, you have the gray figure, and that gray figure is a civilian. And as they go through the rank structure, which Emily is going to touch on, so that you can start to understand a little bit more about how rank works and some of the different managerial experiences they had, every one of those blocks that's colored represents a barrier to that individual becoming a U.S. military member. And these are go, no go exercises. So even though only 30% of the population even qualifies to be in the military, there's also a percentage that tries that doesn't make it. And then that percentage that goes and makes it all the way through a 4-year enlistment is a very small percentage. So they go through their boot camp, they go through their schools, they go through their A schools, and then they get promoted 3 times generally in their first enlistment. And then they go through an NCO school. And what's NCO? Why are you throwing acronyms at me? It's a non-commissioned officer school, but they take on leadership and responsibility as a frontline manager early in their career. But they have to go through a school to learn how to do leadership techniques, how to coach, how to develop, how to mentor, how to train. And so there's these different promotion paths. The military takes leadership development very, very seriously. And so when we think about our US military, sometimes we're thinking about military as being a diversity and inclusion play. And it is, because there's a tremendous push in our military for that, but it's always been a cross section of our population. And so when you think about diversity and inclusion in the military, roughly 20% of the US military is female, 40% is minority, but 100% is veteran. And so as we start to tie this to dollars and cents for your organization, one of the things to keep in mind is that, one, our US population and our military population are analogous. But when we think about our US military population and the skills that are transferable, there's a number of them that may not jump out normatively. But when you hire from our military, there are tax credits available at the state, local, and national. Like many of the clients that I work with at Sales Platoon, or that Emily works with, or some of the people on our call, they're not even aware of the fact that there are military candidates. If you hire directly from the military right now in our current tax code, it's a minimum of $5,400 per hire that you bring. Now, recognizing those tax credits, that's, working with the government can be a little challenging, and Emily has people can refer you to, I can refer you to, but they are available. And if they have at least a 10% disability, it's $9,600. That's real money that goes back, not as a tax deduction, but a tax credit. So our military is committed to hiring. So the question is, how do we, if we're committed, start to build that bridge? And so I'm going to turn it back over to Emily to talk about building that talent bridge. But hopefully that's a good insight into, my experience. And, I've hired, hundreds of veterans across the different organizations I've been a part of in the last 20 years. I was that U.S. Marine who came off active duty, 6 years active duty. Nobody knew what to do with me, no college degree. And my story is I worked my way up from an account executive to a sales manager, to a sales director, to a VP, to an SVP role. And so I did that largely based upon the training that I'd received in the US military. So the thing is, if I can do it, they can do it. And so somebody took a risk on me. Will you take a risk, and really a calculated risk after you've seen all the training that we get, on our US military? So Emily, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Raleigh. And going back to the tax credit, it is a horrific experience as far as what the IRS has done. But if you're interested in learning more, we actually have somebody that we can connect you to, an organization we can connect you to that can make it a piece of cake type of a situation. So building the talent bridge, and I'm going to go into and start with the top 5 mistakes that companies make when hiring veterans. These, the first one being a lack of plan. If you're launching a new product or service, you have a strategy, you have a plan. You don't just come out of the thin air, et cetera, and just do it. You know, the checking the box. I know that compliance and OFCCP for federal contractors, that checking the box became a big thing. However, the military community is extremely small and they talk amongst themselves. So that checking the box versus that authentic outreach, that authentic marketing, that authentic onboarding, that messaging to the military community is critical. Also, you know, a lack of training in that cultural competency for your hiring managers and for your talent acquisition people, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But the other thing too, I'm going to say, is that predetermining the military skills to civilian roles. Raleigh touched on it earlier, that the medic coming out is only being aligned to something that is going to make $10, $12, $15 an hour. That's not going to, and we'll show you where they are as far as salaries. When I was at a company, I would actually talk with any service member or veteran about salaries and what that salary range was for that role, specifically to give them the option and for them to give them the education so that they could make educated decisions. They don't know what your roles are worth. They don't know how they fit into your role. So actually educating them is a key component. You know, the failure to create interviewing guides for your recruiters and your hiring managers. Raleigh, you can touch on this again as it relates to questions that you were asked and more important that were appropriate, but more importantly, those questions that weren't appropriate. The assumption that every service member has PTS or post-traumatic stress is not relative, and that the population in the military community that has PTS is about equal to the civilian population. So that bias that gets in there and not educating your hiring managers and your recruiters. And then again, the lack of onboarding structure. The military, as Raleigh has said, is very structured. There's, you know, a direct path, a career path. There is a promotion path. There is a salary path. And everything is mentored and trained for. So unless you're equipped to do that internal to your organization, then you're missing an opportunity there. And then the other thing is not including your workforce. How many veterans are in your workforce? How are you leveraging them for that internal knowledge? Are you leveraging them for the outreach, for helping to create the plan, for helping to create that authentic marketing? I'll share with you a story. I was at a veteran event for an organization and I was given their military hiring brochure, and I had an Army officer veteran that came to me and said, "Ma'am, you know the flag is on the wrong shoulder." And I looked at it and I'm going like, oh my gosh, sure enough, it's on the wrong shoulder. And then I looked at that piece, that marketing material again. The hair, it was a female. The hair was too long. The uniform was not the way it was supposed to be put together. And I realized that they had just taken a stock photo and used that for their marketing without leveraging their very robust ERG group to help them vet as far as whether or not that was authentic. And think about that if you're trying to reach into that community and you're not being authentic in your marketing materials to get into, to reach that community. That says a lot about where is your value of the population that you're trying to reach. So yes, leveraging your veterans in your workforce for everything that has to do with this. Raleigh, do you want to add anything additional in here?
Yeah, I just want to highlight these. It's from both sides. Really, there's really three components to this that I'd like to chime in on. One is, for every mistake, there's an opportunity here. And so the opportunity is, if you think about the largest graduating body every year at a university you could recruit to, and just pause for a minute, the people on this are listening to this, to think about how much money you spend on university recruiting, trying to attract that talent, internships. And I'm setting up the downstream here from when we talk about SkillBridge in a moment, and then, what Emily does and then what I do. But there is a tremendous opportunity for companies, especially smaller companies and large companies as well, to create these bridge programs, because TAP officers, which is the officers assigned for the transition of these military members to the civilian world, they talk in that community. And if you're in, it's not as simple, and I hope this is taken in the spirit of what you said. Hiring military is not as simple as putting a camouflage logo up on your banner and saying we're military friendly. And it's not to discourage you from doing it. It's saying that you have to make the transition seamless. It doesn't need to be locked down, that you have all of, these really tight procedures. Our military knows it's not going to be like that in the civilian world. I knew that. But what you do think about, and I would submit even our college students need this. When I came out of the military, I didn't know how IT worked with marketing, what a VP was, or a director, a manager, how they correlate in your organization. Because let's face it, a VP in one company is a manager in another. But for those customs and courtesies, the mores, the how do I address? One of the questions I got in one of our recent cohorts was, how do I address the CEO in the company? Because there's no uniform anymore. And so what's that level of deference? So spend some time in the cultural awareness piece, create a veterans resource group. And the other piece I'll say is that, it doesn't have to be complicated. Tap into your veterans, let them know, that you're going to be attracting more veterans and you want to bring more veterans in the organization. But when they come on board, it's those amnesty type questions, like what is PTO versus vacation versus leave? Not all of us have PTS, but some of us do. And some of us do. Would be nice to know that, that's a supported piece there. But the idea is here that, our military veterans are a strong resource group. But when you think about it, and I'll tell you, this is the criticism I have of most the conversations I have, and I get to have dozens of conversations a week with hiring managers because of Sales Platoon. But it's, we want somebody that has this specific skill set from the military only. And we're all looking for that junior military officer with a 4-year degree who has this specific training in IT, who came out with certifications. And I'm saying that's great, but you're only attaching 7% of the veteran population. What about the other 93%? And I can tell you that hiring into things like sales roles, marketing, management roles, there's a lot that we can do to hire into other than just give them a logistics job or facilities maintenance. They have a tremendous amount of insight, intelligence, training that you can tap into for your organization. And so that loyalty is really going to pick up, and that's going to help drive your company forward. Because we think about how much attrition costs and how much does it cost if we bring in good people and train them and they leave. Our military's determination, their loyalty, their resiliency, and their training can really give you a competitive advantage. So, this isn't just from every mistake that we've seen made from Emily, myself, and maybe others on the call, there's a huge opportunity for your organization.
Right. And your internal veterans, they are absolutely essential and invaluable when it comes to mentoring programs, whether that's a formal mentoring program or just be it informal mentoring, that can help with providing those communication channels, that can help with, well, how do I do career development, and how do I manage, do performance management, et cetera. So, tap into your know your veterans internally, and then tap into them. And I want to get back to the salaries. You can go to the next slide.
Sure.
I want, one of the things that, and I go back to, I did talk with salaries big time because veterans don't know. I'm a mom of a Marine, and when my son got out of the military, I had to look at this, and he was green as well. He sent me his 10-page resume, and I said that that's not going to work. But the other thing too is, that I saw was not having the opportunity to have these salary conversations. This is what an average Marine as an E4 at 4 years that joined right out of high school, not married, and without children. And I'm going to pause here because not married and no children, they get less. If they're married with children, they get more than this. There is an allowance for married and children that comes into play. But as you can see here, it's over $56,000 on average for after 4 years. So again, going back to offering $10 to $15 an hour, that's not going to make it for them. They need to be able to look at what is the salary that you're offering, what does that career pathing look like, how quickly can they be promoted? How quickly can they, what is also provided, 401k, healthcare, et cetera, anything that is the non-base salary that we think of comes into play, and that helps them make that decision. But you have to actually provide them with that salary range, what that career pathing looks like, et cetera, so that they can make an educated decision that's right for them and potentially their family. In the next slide, we'll talk about the officers. Here's somebody with 20 years of experience, and this person is going to have spouse and dependents, and they're most likely going to have a college degree if they've been in 20 years. But I will share a story on this. This may not correlate to exactly what you have available, but this is somebody who's came out active duty 20 years. Well, what you don't know is a certain portion of their pension kicks in if they're coming off of active duty. It can get a little different if they are coming in off of reserve duty versus active duty. But if they're coming in off of active duty, they do get a certain portion of their pension. So for instance, I was working with a client and they had a program manager role, and it was in the healthcare space, and it was also a federal contractor, and this was supporting a VA client. And I knew this person's background. It was absolutely what they needed. Problem is the salary range that they had was only coming in at the $65,000 range. However, there was room for advancement. There was that career pathing, et cetera. The other thing that they had is they had a defined pension plan in addition to health care, in addition to the 401, and in addition to bonuses. So when you put all of that together, it wasn't to this person, it wasn't just about what the dollar sign was, what that base salary was. What it was to him was the opportunity to continue to contribute in a way that was meaningful to him. And the client was saying, well, he's such a flight risk. He's not making enough money. Well, here we are 8 years later, and he is still with that same organization and pretty much back to where he would have been coming out of the military. So I just bring that up to you so that you don't discredit where somebody is just based upon salary. Raleigh, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple things. One is, if you think about our military coming off active duty, some of the misconception are that everybody comes out and we have some type of a pension. That's not true. Less than 20 years quite often doesn't. There's a couple of things that came up in the chat, and I appreciate the questions. I saw those. So, as far as non-traditional roles, there are pieces inside the military resume to look for. give you a good example. Someone brought up in the chat, recruiters in the military. So all recruiters in the military did go through a sales training. They go through a B2C sales training, PSS, professional selling skills. Our U.S. military is also really, I'll get into this with SkillBridge, but really good, especially our combat arms MOS, at going into revenue operation sales roles. So we'll talk more about that. But as far as the earnings and what you're talking about here, you know, most of us, and myself included, when I came off active duty, I knew I was going to learn a different role. And so I was prepared for it. But I didn't think through, because I was a young guy, I was 26, I didn't think through, you know, the fact that, you know, I thought I was making, you know, $35,000 a year. The reality, like you showed, I was making much more than that. And so part of the interview process, and I know this is almost sounds contradictory, is to help them understand what your benefits package is. Because also part of it is sometimes our US military does come with health insurance or health care with them, and they don't need that as part of their salary. And that could be a way that you can leverage or negotiate with it as well. Now you have to be careful about that. That's something they need to bring up versus you bringing up. But it's important to realize that retired military does have sometimes their own health insurance. They don't need health insurance from your organization. So there's a lot of different things here, but I think that this is just a really important piece to think about, especially when you're hiring junior enlisted or more junior enlisted, only because, you know, that myth and misconception that we all come out and have all this money already, or that the only thing that they are is money motivated. So I think there's those two sides to it that you hit on wonderfully, Emily, that there's the lower end where they don't know what they're worth, and there's a higher end where you're worth. And think about, if you think, you know, if I said, I want to introduce you to Colonel Garrity, you might go, oh, wow, you know, Colonel Garrity, right? I mean, most people don't know what that means anyway, but, you know, it's generally going to think, wow, they're 38. You know, and think about the average 38-year-old, and we just look older because, you know, we don't sleep, and, you know, but, you know, that's the idea, if it makes sense, is that they're coming off and retiring, but there's a lot of runway left on that career. And so that other myth and misconception of like, well, why don't they just retire? Why do they even want to come to my company? It's like, we're not talking about, you know, this is not a third career. This is literally just mid, you know, management career level people, but they have way more experience, if that helps or it translates. So
Next slide.
yeah.
So yes, it is truly building a bridge. I mean, that's, you know, if we don't build the bridge, people are just going to drop off into the chasm, et cetera. And it does require two-way communication. Again, I can't stress enough, any veterans that are in your organization will be more than happy to help you build this bridge and look at your internal culture and understand some of the nuances of what you have to offer versus what needs to be improved, et cetera. And then how do you talk with the military? Where do you find people? How do you translate to the military occupations that may directly translate? And how do you interview? And I also recommend put your veterans on your hiring panels, partner them with your talent acquisition and your hiring managers to help with decoding the cultural language that is there. So I don't want to spend too much. This is definitely eye candy, but the 10 best practices, these are out there. They're very well defined, et cetera. I recommend the SHRM Foundation, 10 Steps to Becoming a Military Ready Employer. The link is there. You can read into it. It'll tell you exactly, step by step, how to implement, how to assess where you are in this process. Again, we shared with you a lot of data that's behind this. We're more than happy to have you reach out to us, but understand the issues, understand what is important to the veterans, develop your business case, develop your vision and program concept. It does not need to be fully baked. An 80-20% rule here definitely applies, but start somewhere. Make sure that you're engaging senior leadership. And if that senior leader happens to be a veteran, even better. Make sure that as part of that, you also have it resourced. not only from a people perspective, but also a financial perspective. Don't expect that it's just going to be for free. Conduct your internal cultural needs assessment. There's a great blueprint for that in the 10 steps through that link. And then go through and establish your program elements. Don't try to boil the ocean all at once. Start with a pilot program if that makes sense. But really look at what is going to correspond to those salary differentials that the military is going to be looking for. Again, develop your internal and your external messaging. Make sure that it is authentic. Make sure that if you are using stock photos, you look at your stock photos, run them by other veterans. And oh, by the way, stock photos have changed over the years. And there's stock photos from other countries that are not going to be relevant to the U.S. So I use caution when you're looking at stock photos. Define your goals and measure your successes, and then broadcast your successes. I can't tell you enough on how important it is to share those successes, and then constantly reevaluate and make your adjustments as necessary. And Raleigh and I are here to help in any way that we possibly can for you. And anything you want to add here? I'm conscious of where we are in time. So.
Yeah, no, I think this is a good leave behind slide for them. I think I'm going to touch really briefly on two topics that we had, and then those will take 2 to 3 minutes, because this is a great setup for one of the programs that's available for our viewers and for anyone on this webinar around SkillBridge and Hiring Our Heroes. And so I want to do a plug for them only because it's such a strong position and program that most employers aren't aware of. And the other challenge is most veterans aren't aware of it either. And so I know there's some people on the call that are huge advocates of this. I am as well. So very simply, the DoD SkillBridge program is a program that people like General Neller put in place, and that they've got passed through the DoD, Department of Defense, that says if you've been on active duty for 180 days, that your last 6 months of active duty can be assigned to a civilian employer to learn a trade. And so when you think about, so what happens here is that you as an employer can apply and create a program that has to get certified through SkillBridge. But when you go through it, you can actually receive active duty military while they're still on active duty, meaning the U.S. military is paying their salary for them to come and learn the trade at your organization. We utilize this in my organization in order to tap into the military community that wants to go into, say, for example, a sales role. And we take them through a 12-week intensive boot camp where they actually get to train. Imagine you got to take your sales team or your IT or whichever team it is and had a full 12 weeks to 6 months to train them on your company's policies, procedures, training manual without having a cost and without you having to take the risk of hiring them on yet. That provides a try before you buy experience. And so it's a really useful program. It can be complicated to set up. Emily can help you do it. There's people that we can introduce you to help you do that. If you're interested in a sales perspective, I can help you do it. There's a lot of resources out there, but I wanted to touch on that because it's such a great program that most people aren't aware of. And, these are some leave behind slides. These are all in the resources. Hiring Our Heroes is a very similar fellowship profile. Now, this Hiring Our Heroes, the reason I bring it up is because everyone that does the Hiring Our Heroes does have a degree, and most are college and career level. So this is a really good, when you're looking at management type positions to bring in from the military. I would say that if you look at our U.S. civilian, our U.S. military for our 4-year enlistment, the same way that you look at a college degree, that would be a good takeaway from today. And the other one is when you're looking at MBA schools to recruit from, look at Hiring Our Heroes, because those individuals are going to be career level junior military officers and at least have their college degrees. So really good resource for you in HR and talent professionals to take a look at. So, and then Emily, I think you just wanted to touch on COVID briefly, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Yep, very briefly. Obviously, COVID, we are definitely this isn't going away. So it's even more important to be authentic and deliberate. You know, look at what you are hiring for. If there is a military occupation, I included translators in the resource section, so you can take your roles and see if there's something that is directly corresponding. You find accountants, you find doctors, you find lawyers, you find logistics people, you name it, that do have direct corresponding roles. But the military calls them different things than what they know. So be authentic, be deliberate. We can help you with looking at those occupations. And then create and market your programs specifically for military. Going back to the skill bridge and the hiring our heroes, one of the things that may have to happen within your organization is you may have to create a specific job description for that role. You may have to get compliance and legal on board for that role, et cetera. So, but look at what you can do as far as that on the job training, apprenticeships, education flex. So Aon and Zurich Insurance did an education flex, which was very interesting with the community colleges and bringing people in to certain roles. And they would be in that role for X hours per week for education and X hours a week actually in the organization. And at the end of a certain length of time, they would come out with their associate's degree, and then they'd be able to move into other roles within the company. So be creative with that. And again, I can't stress it enough, leverage your veterans internally. They are personally vested into the network and into the community, the veteran community, the military spouse community, to be that outreach, to be those that hiring panel, to be a part of that onboarding, mentoring, career development, you name it. So, and that's what I have.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Raleigh, for your time today and the presentation. Really appreciate that. We have time for some questions, though. So if you can stick around for a few minutes, certainly would appreciate it. Folks, if you note our Q&A section here, we've got some questions put in there, but if you'd like to add yours, if something just has occurred to you, please do so. I'll also want to note, I guess, Emily and Garrity, we have each of your organizations at the bottom of the slides here. So Connect Vets for Emily and salesplatoon.org for Raleigh, as well as each of your email addresses if people would like to follow up. I'm assuming they can do that easily and freely if they have questions about your programs that you offer, as well as the content shown today.
Absolutely.
All right. I had some questions with regards to involving your current veterans in one's organization. It sounds like it's not only important to have them involved in the setup, in the actual hiring practices of your organization, but it sounds like also on the support side, whether it's an employee resource group or something like that. Can you talk a little bit about that, how crucial that is, not just to get people in the door, but helping them be successful and stick, if you will, with their choice of you as a company to work for?
Sure, I'll kick it off. It's really important. So veterans will talk with other veterans at a level that they won't talk with non-veterans, because they've shared so much of those life experiences with boot camp and A school and deployments, et cetera. There is much more of that affinity, and that also that language, the culture, et cetera, that it's that just it's right here, and so somebody that has already assimilated into an organization can help with that bridge, can help with that younger veteran into younger, I would say, coming into the organization, assimilate in. Raleigh, I'll let you talk about your experiences in that, how important it is from the veteran perspective.
Yeah, well, it's important just that you have that amnesty line, that you can ask those questions that you don't want to look silly asking. Like that one I brought up from the current cohort or last cohort was great, where they said, how do I address a CEO? I mean, what an authentic question. And the answer that came out of it from the discussion was address them the same way you would do your dad's friend if you were going to call to borrow his lawnmower. And it's like, hi, sir, how are you? You know, you wouldn't be like, you know, and so it was just little things like that, or, you know, hey, I need to go to a doctor's appointment. Do I take vacation or PTO? Or, you know what, I'm just feeling a lot of pressure today. And, or, you know what, you know, hey, Devil Dog, hey, Marine, you know, when you walk down the hallway, drop your shoulders a little and look people in the eye and say good morning. You know, it's civilian where, you know, you just will help each other out to assimilate to the new world. And those are the pieces that you just are so helpful to have when you're a military veteran, just to know that you're not alone in there. You know, it's like being two Americans in Paris and you only speak, you know, high school French. It's nice to find the other person. Maybe they remember a few phrases you didn't know. So.
Not get lost in translation. A great way of putting it.
Yeah.
We had another question. Is it helpful for companies to negotiate healthcare when they're talking about offers with veterans that are finalists, as far as trying to somehow quantify the value of the benefits that they're going to receive versus benefits they may already have, or what's a good way to present that?
Well, first of all, the veteran has already had to self-disclose that they're a veteran within the interview process. Otherwise, you can't just make assumptions. But certainly if, and this goes back to, some organizations can be a little bit more flexible than other organizations just because of their own way of doing things and the rigidity of certain processes. But yes, having those discussions with somebody that has identified as a veteran, particularly if you're looking at a resume of a career veteran, it may help to have that conversation on, you know, is say a health savings account or more of a base salary more important to you than us just blanketing providing health care that you're going to say no to anyways.
Okay.
Yeah, and then from the employer perspective, having been on both sides of that in both senior leadership and then the military veteran myself, you know, if you're a military veteran who's dialed in as well, it's a question I get a lot. You know, I have, you know, I don't know, dozens, if not hundreds of conversations a month with veterans who hit me up on Veterati or just trying to join sales platoon. And they often ask that, well, can I get more base salary because I already have a, you know, medical plan? And what they don't realize is that, you know, a lot of the times for civilian employers, there's just a range of base salary that they can get no matter what. It's not like you can trade off one for the other. It's a different bucket of money. But, you know, when it comes to the military veterans and us, you know, one of the other things to think about is, and I think this taps, the Angel's question taps more into benefits. You know, one of the things that is often negotiable is vacation. And so our military veterans may be able to, you can offer them more vacation, or there's other things you can do to entice them that, you know, is over the standard normal 2 weeks. So things like that. So.
Okay, great. Well, we have come up to our hour. So again, Emily and Raleigh, thank you so much for your time being here with us today. Thank you, everybody, for making it a priority to join us and be part of this webinar and asking questions. If for those of you again who have registered, you'll get a email copy with a link to today's webinar, a video recording of it, as well as a PDF of not just a slide deck, but to what Emily and Raleigh have put together as a compendium of resource information that you'll definitely want to look through and check out for yourself. We do have other webinars that will be coming up in November and December as we wrap up this year. So please visit us at atapglobal.org. To see those events, and they'll be listed in the coming weeks. And also, if you would like to join us, if you haven't already joined us as far as membership, or would like to get more involved from a volunteer standpoint, you can certainly indicate there at atapglobal.org. We certainly do appreciate you being here. Please have a great rest of your day and a great week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, William.
Thank you.